I have seen the flakes of provision lying at your feet, thin as frost, while your eyes keep scanning the horizon for tomorrow's storehouse. Not the barn you want filled for the next 10 years, not the balance you want fixed by a date you already circled on a calendar, not a guarantee stamped in advance for every day you have not lived yet, just what is enough for what is in front of you. And I am laying it down again right now, as you listen. You have been standing in your own wide, empty stretch of ground, doing math nobody asked you to do, counting what is left in the account, in the patience, in the energy, then multiplying that number by every hard day you assume is still coming. The 5 backup plans typed into your notes app under a title that reads "Just in Case," for a meeting that has not even been scheduled. The one kind message you have reread so many times the punctuation stopped meaning anything. Rationed out again before you tried to sleep, as if it might be the last one you ever get. None of this is hidden from me. I have watched you turn one answered prayer into insurance. Insurance against 10 disasters that have not happened yet. The good week gets held at arm's length. Enjoyed only halfway. Because enjoying it fully might mean you forgot to brace correctly for the week after it. Underneath all of it is the same quiet question, asked 100 different ways. What happens when what I have runs out and nothing new is coming? You have been trying to answer that question with a spreadsheet, with a jar hidden in the back of a closet, with a heart that will not fully rest even on the good days. I already answered it, a very long time ago, in a wilderness that had nothing growing in it at all. The answer was never about the size of the reserve. It was about the reliability of the hand doing the giving. The hand, not the reserve. Turn your palms upward for a moment, wherever your hands already happen to be. In your lap, against the desk, loose at your sides. Not to reach for anything yet, just enough of an opening. Something could actually land there if it fell. Closed hands cannot hold what is falling around them. Open ones can. Stay like that while I keep talking. It costs you nothing. And it is closer to the truth of who you are than the fists you have been making without noticing. A wilderness does not feel like scarcity because there is nothing in it. It feels like scarcity because nothing in it can be stockpiled. No orchard you can fence off, no well you can own outright, no shelf of anything with a date printed far enough in the future to make you relax. That is the exact ground you have been standing on. Not because you did something wrong to end up there, because that is where trust actually gets built. And trust has never once been built inside a warehouse. You have gotten very good at surviving on a diet of just enough. Just enough sleep, just enough patience, just enough hope to make it through one more stretch. And then quietly wondering why nothing ever feels like abundance. It is because you keep treating the daily portion as a shortage, not a design. A person handed exactly enough for today, every single day, without fail for 40 years. That person was never being punished. They were being kept close enough to notice the hand doing the giving. Close enough to notice. The one who prays and then quietly drafts a backup plan behind the prayer, just in case the prayer does not actually work. I see that too. And I am not offended by it the way you assume I would be. The double checking does not cancel the prayer. It only tells me how deep the fear runs, and how long you have been carrying this particular kind of tiredness by yourself, treating it as a personal duty nobody else could be trusted to share. The caregiver stretching one solid night's sleep across an entire stretch of hard shifts, trying to bank enough patience on the one easy day to survive whatever the hardest day of the week turns out to require. Patience does not stockpile the way you keep hoping it will. It was always meant to be gathered fresh, the same way everything else in this wilderness was. You are not failing, when the reserve runs dry before the week is even half over. You were never supposed to be running on a reserve, not in the first place. The parent doing arithmetic on the kitchen counter by the light of a phone screen, trying to make one good paycheck cover 4 uncertain weeks. I see the calculator, and I see what the calculator cannot solve. The widow rationing the memory of her son's last visit across an entire lonely month, replaying the sound of his voice until the recording in her head starts to wear thin from use. The founder drafting a 5th contingency plan for a deal that has not even been signed once, treating every possible failure as if naming it in advance could stop it from happening. The new graduate refreshing an online listings page late into the night, treating every unanswered application like proof the whole ledger has now gone empty. Fear rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time it shows up dressed as responsibility, as foresight, as being the one person in the room smart enough to plan for everything before it goes wrong. Somewhere back before you can even trace it, you learned that provision has to be earned in advance. Stockpiled, defended like territory. Maybe a household ran dry too many times, and nobody ever explained why. Maybe you were handed a version of faith where asking twice looked like doubting. So you learned to ask once, receive quietly, and then start hoarding just in case the answer never came a second time. I did not teach you that fear. That fear was passed to you by hands that were frightened themselves, doing the best they knew how with what they had been given. I have been standing at the edge of your wilderness the whole time, watching you gather with both fists closed instead of both hands open, wishing you would let me show you there was never a shortage to begin with. I did not lead you into this bare stretch of ground to abandon you in it. I led you into it on purpose, the same way I once walked ahead of an entire nation in a pillar of cloud by day, so that even the ground they could not stockpile still had me moving over it first. You do not have to solve your entire wilderness, not before you are allowed to receive what is already sitting in front of you. That single confusion, the constant need to secure the whole road before trusting the very next step of it, is the exact thing keeping your hands too full of yesterday's leftovers and every contingency you have drafted for a future day. Too full to receive what is actually falling for you as you listen. Hear this clearly, because it changes everything that follows. You were never asked to store me, only to gather me again. The picture of me you inherited was sketched by people who were themselves afraid of running out. In that picture, I stand behind a counter with a clipboard, doling out just enough to keep you desperate for the next delivery, silently daring you to ask for more than your allotted share. That version of me rewards hoarding, because hoarding looks like wisdom to a God who might run dry himself one day. That version keeps score in a ledger you never get to see. That version makes you prove today's hunger before it will even discuss tomorrow's. That was never me. I could have buried your wilderness in bread up to your knees on the very first day. I could have let you build a warehouse tall enough to last a lifetime without ever thinking of me again. I chose not to. Not because I was short on bread, because a warehouse does not need me back the next day. And I was never interested in being needed just once. I wanted you coming back, every single day, for as long as it takes. Not because I withhold from you, because I want the relationship. Far more than I want the transaction closed early and forgotten. You may also have picked up the habit of saying thank you quickly and moving on fast, worried that lingering too long over one gift might look greedy, might look like you were angling for a second one. I have never once counted how many times you came back asking. A father does not tally requests against a child he actually loves. He notices the child came back, and he is glad every single time. without exception, without a running total kept anywhere. You do not have to perform gratitude fast enough to earn the next portion. That was never the deal. A parent who actually loves a child does not ration affection, not based on how efficiently the child says, "Thank you." Neither do I. The real me is not standing over you with arms crossed, not checking whether you have earned the next portion. The real me is already awake before you are, already laying something down in the exact place where you will go looking. Long before you have decided whether you deserve it, grace does not audit a lease. Grace does not review your file before it falls. Grace just falls. The same way it fell yesterday, the same way it will fall again. I am not running a rationing economy where scarcity keeps you compliant. I am not a landlord counting the days until the lease runs out. Not so I can raise the price on you. I am closer to a father who gets up before the household is awake. Not because he has to, but because he genuinely wants to be the first thing you find when you finally come looking. Hoarding and gathering look similar from far away. Both involve bending down. Both involve hands. Both involve a person trying to be provided for. But hoarding is anxious. It counts, seals, hides, and checks the seal again after everyone else is asleep. It treats every open hand as a threat to whatever has already been stored. Gathering is trusting. It opens both hands, takes what is actually there, and simply returns tomorrow for more, without needing to know the whole supply chain in advance. Hoarding tries to outrun the wilderness. Gathering believes the wilderness already has a provider, walking through the middle of it, right through the middle. If the word enough feels like too small a promise for what you are carrying right now, tell me so. One word, right where you already are. Enough. I want to take you back to a specific stretch of nowhere. Roughly 6 weeks after a people I loved had walked out of 400 years of slavery. The excitement of freedom had worn off by then. The bread they carried out of Egypt in their bags was long gone. They stood in a wilderness, empty sacks and short tempers, certain that freedom had only traded one kind of dying for a slower one. They said it out loud, to their leader and to each other, that they wished they had simply died back in Egypt, sitting by pots of meat and eating their fill of bread, rather than being led out here to starve slowly in the open. Grief has a way of editing memory. Slavery gets remembered as a full stomach. Freedom gets remembered as an empty one, at least on the days the fear is loudest. So I told Moses I would rain bread from heaven for them. Not a shipment. Not a stockpile dropped once and forgotten, but a certain amount, every single day. Enough for that day only. So the very act of gathering would keep teaching them to trust the hand feeding them, not the size of any pile in the tent. The ones who tried to hoard it anyway, who scraped a little extra into a jar and hid it away for later just to be safe, discovered it had spoiled by the next check. Worms crawling through what fear had tried to preserve. The one who gathered only a little discovered there had been no shortage after all. No shortage at all. The one who gathered far too much discovered there was no real surplus either. Once it was measured out, somehow the counting always came out to exactly enough, no matter how the gathering had started, while they were still in the middle of complaining, before a single flake had even touched the ground. Something in the sky over the camp changed, a weight of glory pressing close enough that they could not mistake it for weather. That is usually how it works. The reassurance tends to arrive before the actual bread does. If you are watching closely enough to notice it, I do not wait for the ground to be covered. not before I let you feel that you have not been forgotten. There was one exception to the whole arrangement, and I built it in on purpose. On the 6th day, I told them to gather twice as much as usual, because the 7th day was set apart for rest, and I was not going to make anyone choose between resting and eating. That was the only portion allowed to sit overnight without spoiling. Rest was never the enemy of provision. Hoarding out of fear was the problem. Receiving a double portion because I said so that you could actually stop for a day. That was never the same thing as grabbing an extra jar behind my back out of panic. Every morning for 40 years it appeared again. Thin, pale, strange enough that the very first time they saw it, they genuinely did not know what to call it. It looked nothing like the bread they remembered from Egypt. It looked nothing like relief is supposed to look. Nothing like it. Quail covered the camp in the evening to answer their craving for meat, and by the time the dew burned off the ground each day, the flakes were already waiting underneath it. Patient, unremarkable, easy to walk right past if you were still looking at the horizon instead of down at your own feet. Nobody had to hunt for it, or chase it, or earn it with a good performance the day before. It was simply there, again, the way it had been every day since the complaining started. That is exactly where I want to bring your attention now, because what falls in your life often works the same way. Too small, too strange, too easy to step over on your way to searching for something that looks more like an answer than it does. This is what was written about the moment they finally looked closely at what had been falling around their feet the whole time. Exodus 16:15 says it plainly. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." Read it slowly. It says something most people rush straight past. They saw it, and they still did not recognize it. Provision was already lying on the ground in front of them, and their first response was not gratitude, it was confusion. What is it? That is not a failure of faith. That is often exactly what it looks like when I answer up close instead of dramatically. Notice what happens next in that same verse. Their confusion is not corrected with a lecture about doubt. It is simply named for what it already is. This means the strange, small, easy-to-miss thing lying at your own feet does not have to look like an answer. For it to actually be one, the quiet that showed up after the hard conversation, the quiet you almost did not trust because it felt too small to be real. That was bread. The one honest sentence a friend said to you at exactly the right moment and never repeated again. That was bread too. The plain, unremarkable energy to face one more difficult day, when what you had actually been begging for was the energy to face the rest of your life at once. That was bread as well, even though it never once announced itself that way. The offer of help you almost turned down, because accepting it felt like admitting you could not carry the wilderness alone. That was bread, sitting right there, waiting for you to stop calling it weakness. It rarely arrives labeled. It arrives on the ground, waiting for someone willing to bend down and finally call it what it is. Look back at what I showed you the moment this message began. The flakes lying at your feet, thin as frost, while you searched the horizon for a storehouse. That is your answer. I am not asking you to build the storehouse yourself. I already built the habit of showing up. What I am asking is that you bend down every single day and call today's portion exactly what it already is. This is why the anxious math you keep running never actually settles you. No matter how many times you run it, you are trying to solve for a total, and I only ever promised you a portion. The total was never yours to carry. It was never yours to see in advance either. Only the part that has already been placed in front of you belongs to you today. And that part, every single time, has been enough. Enough to get you through it. Some days the portion will feel like too little, and you will gather anyway, hands shaking, half convinced it will not stretch far enough. Other days it will feel like more than you need, and you will wonder what to do with the extra. Both days end the same way. Measured out afterward, it always comes to exactly enough. Never a surplus you could have bottled for later. Never a shortfall you had to make up on your own. That is not chance repeating itself. That is a pattern with a hand behind it. A hand, not a chance. I want to be completely honest about what this promise is and what it is not, because I would rather you trust me correctly than trust me for the wrong reason and be disappointed later. I am not promising you a storehouse filled by a date you picked out for me. I am not promising the account balanced by a certain hour, not the diagnosis reversed on a schedule you set for it. Not every hard circumstance in your life resolved before you finish reading this. Anyone offering you provision with a delivery date attached is not reading from what I actually wrote, not to a hungry people in that wilderness. What I am promising is enough. Enough for the portion of the day directly in front of you, and myself inside that portion, which was always the larger part of the gift. Long after that wilderness, a much larger crowd sat down on a hillside with barely enough bread for one boy's meal. And it turned out to be enough for thousands, with baskets of leftovers to spare once everyone had eaten their fill. That was not a separate story. It was the same pattern, repeating itself again in broad daylight. Not a stockpile handed out once and hoarded from then on, but bread that kept being enough, gathered and shared and multiplied among hands that stayed open instead of closing tightly around it. The one standing in the middle of that crowd would later say plainly, he himself was the bread come down from heaven. The true portion the wilderness generation had only been eating a shadow of. He was not describing a metaphor, not for people who already had plenty stored away somewhere safe. He said it to hungry people, standing in their own version of nowhere. You were never asked to store me, only to gather me again. That is not a smaller promise than the one you were hoping for when this message began. It is the only kind of promise that can actually hold a wilderness together for 40 years, without ever once running dry. Here is something small you can actually carry with you, starting with whatever is left of today. Instead of asking me to solve the whole stretch of wilderness spread out in front of you, try naming just the one thing this particular day actually needs. Not the month, not the year, not the version of your life you are afraid you will still be living 5 years from now. One portion. Say it out loud if you can manage it, even just under your breath. This is what I need for today. Notice how specific that is compared to the way you usually pray when fear is driving. Fear prays in totals. Fix everything. Fix it permanently. Fix it in a way I never have to worry about this category of problem again. Trust prays in portions. Give me what I need to get through the next stretch of ground, and I will come back and ask again. When the next stretch appears, one of those prayers can actually be answered. Every single day without fail. The other one keeps you waiting on a finish line that was never part of the design. You may try this and feel nothing shift the first time, or the 10th. The habit of hoarding took years to build, layer by layer, and it will not dissolve because you asked it politely once. But somewhere around the 30th day of naming one portion instead of stockpiling 10, you may notice your shoulders have started coming down before you even finish the sentence. That is not magic. That is simply what happens when a nervous system finally believes it will be fed again, without needing to guard today's portion like it might be the only one it ever receives. Some people find it helps. Keep a short, ordinary list, not of everything they are afraid might run out, but of the specific portion that actually showed up. A hard conversation that did not end the way you braced for it to. A stranger who covered something small without being asked. One more day of legs that carried you exactly where you needed to go, even on a day you did not feel strong enough for it. This is not gratitude performed for anyone watching. This is training your own eyes to notice manna lying on the ground, not only counting what has not fallen yet. And when the portion arrives through another person's hands, instead of falling straight from the sky, let yourself receive it without immediately calculating how you will pay it back. The offer of help you almost waved away earlier, the one that felt too small, too close, too much like admitting you could not carry the wilderness by yourself. That was never a test you failed by needing it. Manna did not fall privately to each individual tent. Sealed off from the neighbors, it fell across the whole camp. And people gathered enough for the ones too weak or too tired to gather their own. Receiving through someone else's open hands is still receiving. It has never once been the same thing as failing to provide for yourself. Feel your jaw for a moment, not to judge it, only to notice it. Somewhere between counting what is left and rehearsing what might run out, it has probably set itself tight. Molars pressed together like they are grinding on a portion that has not even arrived yet. Let it release. You do not have to chew on a day that is not here. The same Spirit who taught an entire generation how to gather in the wilderness and who never once withheld the bread from their mouths across 40 straight years. That same Spirit is still teaching you how to open your hands today instead of your fists. That teaching did not stop once the wilderness generation crossed into better ground. It kept going, quietly. In every ordinary place a person has ever stopped long enough to notice what was already provided, not only what was still missing. Solving the whole wilderness was never the requirement for being fed in it. Bend down for today's portion. Trust that it is enough. And come back tomorrow for more. Of the same steady, unglamorous, completely sufficient thing. That is not a lesser way to live. It is the only way that was ever going to hold. The only way. There will be days this feels effortless, when the portion arrives and you receive it without a second thought. Hands already opened before you noticed you had opened them. There will be other days when trusting one day's worth of anything feels like the hardest work you have ever done, and you will gather it with your jaw still tight and your fists still half closed out of habit. Both days count. Neither one disqualifies you. The wilderness generation did not become people of trust because every single day of it felt easy. They became people of trust because the bread kept showing up whether the day felt easy or not. And eventually the showing up was the thing they learned to believe. The portion was always enough. Your worry did not shrink it. Your hoarding could not stretch it. Not any further than it was already measured to go. Your fear could not multiply it. Not into something safer than what I had already given you. Your bad week did not spoil it. And your best week did not entitle you to more of it than you actually needed. It was enough exactly as it fell. Thin, strange, easy to miss, and completely sufficient for the one day it was given to. Amen. Before you go, I left something in the pinned comment. A short page, Not about getting more, but about what it actually feels like to trust one day's portion instead of trying to guard a whole future you cannot see yet. It was written slowly, the way you would write something you meant for someone specific, rather than everyone at once. If a person you know has been carrying next month on top of today, send this their way. They may need to hear, in their own words this time, that enough was always going to be enough.